Thank you very much, Dan. Julie, thanks for the time. Hope you're staying safe. Hope all our viewers are staying safe as well. Plenty to discuss in and around the U.S. women's national team over the last week. Let's start with some comments from U.S. Soccer's new president, former teammate of yours, Cindy Parlow Cone. Now, she made these comments actually during a conference call earlier this week about U.S. Soccer's new CEO. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But really, the topic of this conference call, aside from the CEO and maybe even over the CEO, was the gender discrimination lawsuit between the U.S. women's national team and the federation. So here's the quote that I think most people are talking about from this conference call. Quote, "I think that's one of our top priorities right now." This is what Cindy Parlow Cone said about the gender discrimination lawsuit. Quote, "I don't think the trial is good for either party or for soccer in this country or internationally. Obviously, our women's team is the best in the world, and I'm hopeful that we can find a resolution before this goes to trial." Julie, this was a very different tone than some of the other stuff we've heard recently coming out of the Federation. Just kind of what was your reaction to hearing this, not just from the president, but also, as we mentioned, a former teammate of yours?
Not surprising. I know Cindy clearly wants to send a message out that, look, things are going to change. It's going to be different. You can start to trust us now. And that goes to the players, right? Given all that's transpired in this past week or so. And also it's a no-win situation, Sebastian, for U.S. soccer. Even if they win the trial, they lose with public sentiment. And we've seen how they've gotten that so very wrong over the last week and a half. And I think for the players as well, going to trial is an unknown for them, and they don't know. And every legal expert I talk to doesn't necessarily agree on how a judge will rule on the FIFA money, which is, of course, the big X factor, because FIFA pays out so much more for the men versus the women, which is a huge part of U.S. soccer's defense. And how a judge would rule on that, I hear from both sides saying they don't know. And so I think actually the players want to settle as well. So with this change of the page for U.S. soccer and a different chapter, maybe that actually comes to fruition.
Yeah, the trial is set to go on May 5th. Obviously, with what's happening in the world, we don't know if that date will come to pass. But what we do know is that at some point, this will either be settled or go to trial. Based on everything you know, and given all that's changed in the last really week or two around this situation, what does your gut tell you right now, Julie? Do you think this will be settled, or do you think this will play out in court?
My gut says this will be settled. And especially with the coronavirus affecting every courthouse in the nation, the chances of it actually going to trial on May 5th, as we know, are very slim. So I think that helps. It gives them a little more time. You see Cindy Parlow Cone doing a lot of outreach as a former player to the players, and saying, look, I get why you're angry, and let's change things, and let's actually sit down and discuss things. And then I think having a new CEO for U.S. soccer helps as well. Will Wilson coming in. He is, of course, everyone first points to the fact that he comes from but that was many years ago, over a decade ago, from Soccer United Marketing and his connection to MLS there. But he also, let's not forget, spent 8 years in his most recent role as a senior VP at Wasserman running the football division. So he's an agent. He gets the player's perspective, and has lived that side as well. And I honestly think that will be super helpful, because a lot of the players are represented by what agency, Sebastian? Wasserman.
There you go. You mentioned it. There's plenty of ties between Wasserman and the Athletes Council. You mentioned Major League Soccer and Soccer United Marketing that are on Mr. Wilson's resume. Of course, they have great influence within the federation. I don't think you can categorize this positively or negatively as anything other than like an insider hire. How do you feel about that?
I wouldn't call it an insider hire. I think he has a connection, of course, to some, which everyone is pointing out. And I get the hesitancy there. And I think actually that should be one of the first things that Cindy and Will Wilson deal with, is getting rid of some of the mystique around the some relationship and the money's going back and forth, and provide some transparency and ask for some transparency there, because that really is the root of all of this, is that there is no transparency to the interactions with MLS and with US Soccer and those three entities. So, but I do think that he has on his resume all of the qualifications. He's fluent in Spanish as well, which has been a huge issue, of course, with US Soccer and their lack of diversity in terms of outreach to the Hispanic community, as you know very well, Sebastian. So he comes from NFL, which is a different football, but with his skill set, seemingly on paper, I don't know Will Wilson, he seems like he has all the potential to hopefully right this ship, because boy, what a mess he inherited, that's for sure.
Let's focus on some on-the-field matters, though, even if they're pushed back a little bit. We know the Olympics this week, we just found out, will be postponed. I don't think maybe like fans of soccer on the men's side are really talking about this as much, but in the women's game, this is a major deal, isn't it?
It's huge. Always the Olympics runs the very next year after a Women's World Cup, which is why no one has ever won a Women's World Cup and then in that very tight turnaround won the Olympics the next year. They've never done that back-to-back double. It was something the U.S. women were very focused on, but they also understood it's hard to do. So I actually think the delay for the women is a plus. I think the overall sentiment is, okay, we can take a breath, we can release, we can let go a little bit and build. And I actually spoke to Carly Lloyd, and she said, and no surprise here, she said, the delay actually means just another year for me to get better individually and for us as a team to get better. And so that really is the mindset I think the U.S. women, at least, are coming into this with.
This will change, though, some of the calculations for Vlatko Andonovski, right? Because you mentioned Carly Lloyd. Sure, she'll be a year older. But Alex Morgan, in theory, would be a year further removed from her pregnancy. So she might be available. So this could really change, actually, who's on the field for the U.S. at these Olympics, couldn't it?
Yeah. If you're Alex Morgan, who is due in April with her baby, you're like, okay, there's a chance now. I've got a year and some. I mean, that was great news for her. But yeah, it's a whole different equation, of course, because now you could theoretically look at more players. You could bleed in some younger kids. Now you've got a year plus to actually build the team, develop the team, look at some new players, look at some new positions. I think Vlatko Andonovski was very, I wouldn't say unwilling, but very reticent to actually do that because he knew of such the tight turnaround and how fast the Olympics were approaching. And so now I think it opens that window up to actually see more players. And obviously you get potentially Alex Morgan back into the equation.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week, subscribe to ESPN+.